The vast emptiness of space had a way of lulling a pilot into complacency. For Captain Eli Vasquez, the monotony was broken only by the hum of the Orion Sprint's engines and the occasional chirp from the navigation system. But this time, the silence shattered in a far more violent way. Warning! Hull integrity compromised. The ship's AI voice was calm, almost indifferent, as the lights flickered and the cockpit shook violently. What the dash? Eli's hands darted over the controls, attempting to stabilize the ship as it careened towards an uncharted planet. He had been on a simple cargo run, a straight shot through an unexplored quadrant to shave off time. It seemed like a good idea until it wasn't. The ship's proximity sensors screamed. A sudden burst of electromagnetic energy had surged from the planet below, frying his systems and sending him plummeting into the atmosphere. Fire streaked past the windows as he entered the planet's pull, the hull groaning under the stress. The cockpit filled with acrid smoke, and the oxygen alarms wailed. Eli gritted his teeth. Come on, baby, hold together. He scanned the planet's surface through the smoke and haze, a mix of dense forests and jagged, alien rock formations. Spotting a relatively flat plain, he aimed the ship for it, bracing as the vessel slammed into the ground, skidding and throwing up a plume of dirt and debris. When the dust settled, Eli coughed as he unbuckled himself from the pilot's seat. His hands were trembling, but he was alive. That was something. The Orion Sprint, however, wasn't in such good shape. Sparks flew from exposed wiring, and a low, ominous hiss came from somewhere in the rear. Stepping outside into the crisp alien air, Eli surveyed his surroundings. The sky was a swirling canvas of deep orange and violet, with two suns sinking low on the horizon. Strange trees with translucent leaves towered above him, their trunks glistening as if coated in glass. The air smelled faintly of sulfur, tinged with a sweetness that made his stomach turn. He turned back to his ship. The hull was scorched, the engine compartment a smoking wreck. The communications array was gone, obliterated during the crash. He sighed and ran a hand through his sweat-drenched hair. Great. Just great. Eli's survival instincts kicked in. First, assess the damage. Second, figure out how to fix it. Third, hope someone notices you're missing. He climbed into the wreckage and rummaged for his emergency kit, a slim pack containing a rudimentary survival shelter, rations, and a multi-tool. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As he worked, a sound made him freeze. A faint rustling, coming from the tree line. Eli's hand instinctively moved to his sidearm. He peered into the forest, his heart pounding. The sound grew louder, closer, until a figure emerged. She moved with an elegance that didn't belong in the chaos of the crash site. She stood taller than any human, her form both lithe and powerful. Her skin glimmered like liquid metal, catching the light of the twin suns, and her eyes glowed faintly blue, scanning him with a mix of curiosity and calculation. Eli raised his weapon. Stay back. The figure tilted her head, unfazed. When she spoke, her voice was melodic, layered with harmonics that made the air around her hum. If I wanted to harm you, human, your weapon would not stop me. Eli hesitated, his finger hovering over the trigger. The alien woman took a step closer, her gaze shifting to the wrecked ship behind him. Your vessel is damaged. No kidding, he muttered, keeping the weapon trained on her. She ignored his tone, walking past him toward the Orion Sprint. Her long, graceful fingers hovered over the shattered engine casing, her glowing eyes narrowing as if she could see inside the machinery. After a moment, she turned back to him. I can fix this. Eli blinked. What? Your ship. I can repair it. He lowered the weapon slightly, confusion mixing with a sliver of hope. You're telling me you can fix an advanced human spacecraft? Just like that? Her expression didn't change. I am Lyra. My people's knowledge surpasses what you call advanced. But I will not help you without something in return. There it was, the catch. Eli crossed his arms, trying to mask his growing desperation. What do you want? Her glowing eyes met his, unblinking. A task. There is something I must recover from this planet. It is dangerous, but I cannot retrieve it alone. Help me, and I will ensure your ship is space-worthy again. Eli glanced back at his ruined vessel, then at Lyra. He didn't have many options. His survival depended on her. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she wanted wasn't going to be simple. Fine, he said reluctantly. But if this turns out to be some kind of trick dash... Lyra interrupted him with a faint smile, the first trace of emotion she'd shown. I assure you, Captain, the only trick here is how you managed to crash so spectacularly. Now, gather your things. We leave at first light. Eli groaned and muttered under his breath as she walked away. Great. Stranded on an alien planet, and now I'm running errands for a glowing spacewoman. As the twin suns disappeared beneath the horizon, Eli set up his shelter beside the wreckage, his mind racing. He had no idea what he'd gotten himself into, but at least now, he wasn't alone. The first light of dawn on the alien planet was unlike anything Captain Eli Vasquez had ever witnessed. Twin suns bathed the world in hues of orange and teal, casting long shadows across the crystalline landscape. Lyra stood at the edge of the clearing, her metallic skin catching the sunlight, making her look more like a statue than a living being. Eli, rubbing sleep from his eyes, wondered for a moment if she ever needed to rest. Are you ready, Captain? Lyra's voice, calm but commanding, cut through his thoughts. He adjusted the straps of his survival pack, his sidearm holstered and a blade strapped to his thigh. As ready as I'll ever be. You mind telling me what exactly we're walking into? Lyra turned, her glowing blue eyes narrowing slightly. The artifact I seek lies in the ruins of an old temple. It was built by my ancestors to harness the planet's unique energy fields. The temple is now overrun by hostile creatures and unstable terrain. I could not retrieve the artifact alone. Eli frowned, his unease growing. And this artifact? What's so important about it? It is a key, Lyra said simply. A power source unlike anything you know. With it, I can reactivate ancient technologies that my people once used to flourish on this planet and beyond. Eli raised an eyebrow. A power source, huh? Why didn't your people just take it with them when they left? Her expression darkened. We had little time. The cataclysm came without warning. In our haste to escape, many essential relics were left behind. Eli noticed a brief flicker of pain in her usually stoic demeanor and decided not to press further. All right, he said. Lead the way. The journey began through dense, alien forests where trees with translucent, spiraling leaves stretched skyward. Strange bioluminescent insects flitted through the air, casting a soft glow on the ground. The terrain was uneven, with jagged rocks and deep chasms hidden beneath dense undergrowth. Eli followed Lyra, who moved with an unnatural ease, as if the terrain bent to her will. He stumbled more than once, his boots sinking into patches of spongy moss or slipping on slick roots. Lyra would occasionally glance back, her expression unreadable. Human physiology is inefficient, she remarked at one point, watching him struggle to climb over a fallen tree trunk. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Eli muttered, hauling himself up. Next time I crash land on an alien planet, I'll be sure to grow an extra set of legs. They continued in silence for hours, the alien jungle gradually giving way to rocky terrain. The air grew heavier, the sweet sulfur scent intensifying. Lyra paused at the edge of a wide gorge, her gaze fixed on the opposite side where a crumbling stone structure jutted out of the earth like a broken tooth. There, she said, pointing. The temple. Eli squinted. The structure looked ancient, its walls carved with intricate patterns that shimmered faintly in the sunlight. A large doorway loomed at the center, dark and foreboding. Great, he said. How do we get there? I don't see a bridge. Lyra pointed to a series of narrow, jagged stone spires rising from the gorge. They formed a precarious path across the chasm, each step looking more dangerous than the last. Eli groaned. Of course. Why would there be an easy way? Lyra stepped onto the first spire, her movements fluid and confident. She turned back to Eli. Do not fall. Helpful advice, he muttered, carefully placing his foot on the first rock. The spire swayed slightly under his weight, and he had to fight the urge to look down at the abyss below. His heart pounded as he followed Lyra, step by agonizing step, until they finally reached the other side. The temple loomed above them, its surface covered in vines and alien flora. The carvings on the walls seemed to shimmer faintly as they approached, as if reacting to their presence. Lyra stopped at the entrance, her expression somber. Once we enter, you must stay close, she warned. The temple is alive in its own way. It will test us. Test us? Eli frowned. What does that mean? You will see, she said cryptically, before stepping inside. The air within the temple was cool and oppressive, the faint hum of energy filling the space. The walls pulsed faintly with light, casting eerie shadows. Lyra moved forward with purpose, her eyes scanning the environment. The first chamber was filled with what looked like pillars of light, each one flickering erratically. As they moved closer, one of the pillars flared up, emitting a sharp, high-pitched sound. Eli instinctively stepped back, but Lyra raised a hand. Do not fear. These are merely sentries. They are scanning us. For what? For intent, she said, her voice calm. My people built the temple to ensure only those worthy could claim what lies within. Eli snorted. So, what happens if it decides we're not worthy? Lyra didn't answer, which only made him more nervous. After a moment, the light pillars dimmed, allowing them to pass. The next chamber was more foreboding. Its floor was a grid of glowing tiles, each one shifting in color and brightness. A puzzle, Lyra said, crouching to examine the floor. Step on the wrong tile, and it will trigger a defense mechanism. Eli's stomach sank. What kind of defense mechanism? She pointed to the charred remains of what looked like a long-dead creature in the corner of the room. An effective one. Great, Eli muttered. Let's not trigger that. Together, they navigated the puzzle, with Lyra analyzing the patterns and Eli following her lead. His every step felt like it might be his last, but they eventually reached the other side unscathed. As they moved deeper into the temple, the challenges grew more intricate, blending physical traps with mental puzzles. Through it all, Eli couldn't help but marvel at Lyra's knowledge and composure. She seemed in her element here, her connection to the temple almost tangible. Finally, they reached a large, circular chamber at the heart of the temple. At its center was a pedestal, atop which rested a crystalline artifact glowing with a brilliant, otherworldly light. Eli could feel its energy from where he stood, a pulsing warmth that seemed to resonate with his very being. This is it, Lyra said, her voice filled with reverence. She stepped forward, but as her fingers brushed the artifact, the temple began to shake violently. Eli drew his weapon, scanning the chamber as chunks of stone fell from the ceiling. What's happening? Lyra's eyes glowed brighter as she grabbed the artifact. The temple is collapsing. We must leave now. Without another word, they sprinted back the way they had come, the ground shaking beneath their feet and the walls crumbling around them. Eli's heart pounded as he dodged falling debris, barely keeping up with Lyra's inhuman speed. When they finally emerged from the temple, gasping for breath, the structure behind them collapsed in on itself, disappearing into the gorge below. Eli looked at Lyra, who held the artifact tightly in her hands, her metallic skin shimmering in the sunlight. That, he said between breaths, was insane. Lyra glanced at him, a faint smile on her lips. You did well, Captain. Eli shook his head, collapsing onto the ground. I hope whatever that thing is, it's worth it. It is, Lyra said, her voice steady. And so is your ship. Eli sighed, staring up at the alien sky. This had better be one hell of a repair job. Eli leaned heavily against a tree at the edge of the temple's ruins, sweat dripping from his forehead. The adrenaline of their escape hadn't fully faded, and his heart still raced as he watched Lyra cradle the glowing crystalline artifact in her metallic hands. She inspected it with a mix of reverence and relief. "You're awfully calm for someone who just outran a collapsing death trap," Eli muttered, wiping dirt from his face. Lyra glanced at him, the faint glow of her eyes flickering like firelight. "I have spent many cycles preparing for this moment. You, Captain, performed admirably for a human." Eli shook his head, smirking despite himself. "I'll take that as a compliment. Now, you've got your shiny crystal thing. Can we finally focus on fixing my ship?" She rose to her feet with fluid grace, tucking the artifact into a pouch that seemed to materialize on her hip. "The artifact is only a part of what we need. The temple was one trial. The next lies deeper within the planet." Eli groaned, throwing his head back. "You're kidding me. There's more?" Lyra's expression hardened, her voice quiet but firm. "You made a pact, Captain. I will honor my part and repair your ship, but only after we complete this task. The artifact is useless without the stabilizer that binds it." Eli opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. He was exhausted, but he didn't have a choice. He had no way off this planet without her. "All right," he said with a sigh. "Lead the way." The journey to the second destination took them across even harsher terrain. The dense forest gave way to barren rocky plains riddled with deep fissures. Steam hissed from cracks in the ground, and the air grew hotter and heavier with each step. Lyra moved with unerring precision, as if she could feel the planet's energy guiding her. Eli, on the other hand, stumbled over uneven rocks, his boots kicking up clouds of dust. The desolation of the landscape weighed on him. There was no sign of life here, no trees, no creatures, just the oppressive heat and the distant sound of geothermal activity. "What's the deal with this place?" Eli asked, breaking the silence. "Why does it feel like the planet's alive?" Lyra glanced back at him. "Because it is. This world was not merely a home for my people, it was a symbiotic partner. The energy that flows beneath its surface nourished us, and in return, we helped stabilize its environment. When my people fled, that balance was broken." Eli frowned, his curiosity piqued despite himself. "And you think this artifact can fix it?" "It is a beginning," she said. "With the artifact and the stabilizer, I can reactivate dormant systems designed to restore equilibrium. Without them, this world will die." Eli let that sink in. He had been so focused on his own survival that he hadn't considered the larger stakes. "All right," he said. "So where's the stabilizer?" Lyra pointed to a jagged mountain in the distance. Its peak was shrouded in swirling clouds, and faint flashes of light danced within them. "There." Eli squinted. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be at the top of a mountain?" The climb was grueling. The mountain's surface was treacherous, with loose rocks and sheer cliffs that made every step a gamble. As they ascended, the temperature dropped sharply, and the winds picked up, howling like restless spirits. "Lyra," Eli said, his voice muffled by the scarf he had wrapped around his face. "Tell me something. Why didn't your people ever come back for this stuff?" Her pace didn't falter, but her tone grew somber. "Many did not survive the exodus. Those who did were scattered across the stars. By the time we regained the strength to return, the planet's defenses had grown hostile." "Hostile how?" "You have seen only a fraction of it," she said cryptically. Eli didn't press further. He had a sinking feeling he was about to find out exactly what she meant. They reached the entrance to the mountain's core as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting the world into a surreal twilight. The entrance was a gaping maw carved into the rock, its edges lined with glowing runes similar to those in the temple. Inside, faint vibrations could be felt in the ground, as if the mountain itself was breathing. "This is it," Lyra said, stepping inside. The passage led them into a vast underground chamber illuminated by veins of pulsing blue energy running through the walls and ceiling. At the center of the chamber stood a massive, cylindrical structure, an ancient machine covered in intricate carvings. Floating above it, suspended by invisible forces, was the stabilizer, a large, disc-shaped device that pulsed in sync with the energy veins. Eli stared in awe. "This looks ancient. How does it still work?" Lyra approached the machine, her fingers brushing against its surface. "The technology of my people is self-sustaining, but it requires balance to function. The stabilizer keeps the energy in harmony. Without it, the artifact is unstable and dangerous." Eli moved closer, peering up at the floating stabilizer. "All right, so what's the plan? Do we just grab it?" "No," Lyra said sharply. "The stabilizer is protected. We must disable the defenses before we can take it." As if on cue, the chamber began to rumble. The veins of energy flared brighter, and shapes began to emerge from the walls, humanoid constructs made of stone and energy, their eyes glowing with the same blue light. "Let me guess," Eli said, drawing his weapon. "These are the defenses?" Lyra didn't answer. She raised her hands, and the runes on her body flared to life, emitting a pulse of energy that sent the nearest construct staggering back. "Stay behind me," she ordered. Eli ignored her, firing his sidearm at an advancing construct. The bullets shattered against its stone exterior, barely slowing it down. "Well, that's not working." The constructs advanced, their movements unnervingly precise. Lyra moved like a whirlwind, her energy pulses striking them with surgical accuracy, but for every one she brought down, two more seemed to emerge. "We can't keep this up," Eli shouted, ducking as a construct swung a heavy stone arm at him. Lyra's glowing eyes flicked toward the stabilizer. "We don't have to. The defenses are tied to the machine. If we sever the connection, they will fall." "Great," Eli said. "How do we do that?" She pointed to a series of glowing nodes around the base of the machine. "Destroy those." Eli nodded, sprinting toward the nearest node as the constructs closed in around him. He fired his weapon at the node, the concentrated energy from his shots causing it to shatter in a burst of light. The constructs around him faltered, their movements slowing. "Keep going," Lyra shouted, unleashing another pulse of energy. With each node Eli destroyed, the constructs weakened. Finally, he reached the last one, smashing it with the butt of his gun. The entire chamber shook, and the constructs collapsed, their forms crumbling into lifeless stone. The stabilizer's glow dimmed slightly, but it remained suspended above the machine. Lyra approached it, her expression solemn as she extended her hands. The device lowered into her grasp, its pulsing light syncing with the artifact in her pouch. "It is done," she said, turning to Eli. "You have done well, Captain." Eli leaned against the now dormant machine, catching his breath. "Please tell me that's the last death trap we have to deal with." Lyra offered him a faint smile. "For now." Eli groaned. "For now." "Fantastic." The descent from the mountain was no easier than the climb. The air was sharp and cold, and the faint vibrations of the planet's energy beneath their feet seemed to hum louder, as if the stabilizer and artifact in Lyra's possession had awakened something deep within the planet. Eli trailed behind her, weary but determined, his boots crunching over loose gravel as the alien sky began to darken. "So," Eli said, breaking the silence, "we've got your artifact and the stabilizer. Time to hold up your end of the deal, right?" Lyra glanced back at him, the glowing runes on her body dimmer than before. "Yes. But you should know that activating these devices will not simply fix your ship." Eli stopped in his tracks. "What do you mean?" "These components tap into the planet's energy field. To repair your ship, we must restore a small section of that field to stabilize its systems. Doing so may attract attention. Eli groaned, dragging a hand down his face. Of course. What kind of attention? Lyra's glowing eyes met his, steady and unwavering. The kind we must be prepared to fight. By the time they returned to the crash site, the twin suns had fully set, leaving the alien world bathed in the eerie glow of its 3 moons. The Orion Sprint was as battered and lifeless as Eli had left it, its scorched hull reflecting the dim light. He stood at the edge of the clearing, arms crossed, while Lyra approached the ship, placing the stabilizer and artifact on the ground in front of her. She knelt and began carving intricate patterns into the dirt with her metallic fingers. The lines glowed faintly, forming a circular array around the devices. Eli watched, his curiosity growing as the patterns pulsed with a rhythmic energy. This is the restoration field, Lyra explained without looking up. It will tap into the planet's core to channel energy into your ship. The process will take time. And while it's doing that? Eli asked, already knowing the answer. She looked up at him, her expression grim. We will protect it. The activation of the array was both mesmerizing and terrifying. As Lyra placed the stabilizer and artifact into the center of the glowing pattern, the air crackled with electricity. The ground trembled as beams of light shot upward, connecting the array to the shimmering auroras above. A deep, resonant hum filled the clearing, growing louder with each passing second. Eli crouched behind a boulder, his sidearm in hand, scanning the tree-line. How long is this going to take? Minutes, Lyra replied, her voice calm despite the growing tension in the air. But they will feel longer. The first sign of trouble came as a guttural roar echoed through the forest. Eli tensed, his eyes darting toward the sound. From the shadows emerged a creature that seemed to be a manifestation of the planet's energy itself, a massive, quadrupedal beast with glowing veins running through its translucent body. Its eyes burned with the same blue light as the artifact. Let me guess, Eli muttered. That's what you meant by attention. Lyra stood, the runes on her body flaring to life. This guardian was created by my people to protect the planet's energy sources. It views us as a threat. Fantastic, Eli said, raising his weapon. Got a plan? I will engage it directly. Your task is to keep any others from reaching the array. Others? Eli asked, but his question was answered before it left his lips. More shapes emerged from the forest, smaller constructs of stone and energy, their glowing eyes fixed on the array. Lyra moved with inhuman speed, launching herself at the massive guardian. Her hands glowed with energy as she struck the creature, the impact sending a shockwave through the clearing. The beast roared and retaliated, swiping at her with a massive claw, but she dodged with fluid precision. Eli, meanwhile, focused on the smaller constructs. His sidearm had little effect on their stone bodies, but he quickly learned to aim for the glowing energy cores embedded in their chests. A few well-placed shots caused them to collapse, but the constructs kept coming. This is a terrible plan, Eli shouted, kicking one of the constructs back as he reloaded. Lyra, locked in combat with the Guardian, didn't respond. The battle was brutal, the Guardian strikes creating craters in the ground while Lyra's energy blasts scorched its translucent body. Despite her skill, it was clear she was tiring. Eli's situation wasn't much better. The constructs seemed endless, and for every one he destroyed, another took its place. He felt the weight of the fight pressing down on him, the odds stacked impossibly high. Then, just as he thought they couldn't hold out any longer, the array's hum changed pitch. The beams of light grew brighter, their energy surging toward the Orion Sprint. The ship's systems flickered to life, and a low whine signaled the restoration of its engines. Lyra! Eli shouted. It's working. Lyra glanced back, her glowing eyes narrowing as the Guardian lunged at her again. With a final burst of energy, she unleashed a pulse that sent the creature staggering backward. She turned and sprinted toward Eli, her movements unsteady but determined. Get to the ship, she yelled. Eli didn't need to be told twice. He bolted for the Orion sprint, firing over his shoulder at the remaining constructs. Lyra reached the ship moments later, diving into the open airlock as the Guardian roared behind her. "Go," she shouted, collapsing onto the floor. Eli scrambled into the cockpit, slamming the controls. The ship's engines roared to life, and with a surge of power, the Orion sprint lifted off the ground. Below, the Guardian roared in frustration, swiping at the departing vessel as the array's energy dissipated. As they ascended into the alien sky, Eli glanced over his shoulder at Lyra. She was slumped against the wall, her metallic skin dim and cracked in places, but she gave him a faint smile. "You kept your promise," Eli said, his voice tinged with respect. "And you kept yours," Lyra replied, her voice weak but steady. "My people would be proud." Eli turned back to the controls, setting a course for the nearest starport. "So, what happens now? You coming with me?" Lyra shook her head. "No. My work here is not done. But you must tell your people what you have seen. Perhaps they can help us restore what was lost." Eli nodded, understanding the weight of her request. As the planet grew smaller in the viewport, he felt a pang of regret at leaving it behind. But he knew this wasn't the end of the story, just the beginning. As the Orion sprint broke through the planet's atmosphere and into the vast expanse of space, Eli allowed himself a small smile. For once, he felt like he'd done something that mattered not just for himself, but for a lost civilization and a remarkable ally. "Good luck, Lyra," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the stars.